been framed all 9 issues that had been framed for determination by the court, but in respect of issues number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I will rely on the written submissions that we have filed or that have been filed on behalf of the third petitioner, and I will utilize my time on my feet this afternoon to focus on issue number 6, the conjoined issue number 7, number 8, and number 9 of the issues that the court framed or the court has framed for determination. I wish to get straight into issue number 6, and my humble understanding of issue number 6, and I will read it just for clarity: whether the IEBC has carried out the verification, tallying, and declaration of results in accordance with Article 138(3)(c) and 138(10) of the Constitution. Again, it is my humble understanding from the manner in which that issue is phrased that what the court is inquiring into is not whether tallying and verification should be done in accordance with Article 138(3)(c) and 138(10), but indeed whether tallying was carried out by Article 138(3)(c) and 138(10) by the IEBC. Time was taken by my learned senior colleague, Mr. Paul Mwangi, earlier on this morning, to make submissions as to what the IEBC is, the meaning and definition of the IEBC, and what amounts or what body or group of people then amount to the IEBC. And that is a submission of law, and I don't intend to repeat the submissions that were made by my learned senior colleague. But the issue as framed in number 6 invites a detailed factual inquiry. And that factual inquiry is the factual question of was the tallying and verification during the or after the presidential election that is the subject of these petitions indeed carried out by the IEBC. I wish to start my submissions by referring you to a press statement, and that press statement is by the chairman of the IEBC. I believe he's the second respondent. That press statement is dated the 17th of August 2022, and that press statement is to be found in volume 4 of the third petitioner's documents at pages 493 to 496. That press statement is dated the 17th of August. It is headed, the subject is staff murder, profiling, and misleading reports on the presidential election. It is under the hand of the chairman of the IEBC, and it is divided into 3 parts. I wish to focus my submissions on part 3. And part 3 is headed Declaration of Presidential Results. And I submit that this press statement is important because it is the first account by the second respondent as to how tallying and verification took place. In line 12, he states, "For the avoidance of doubt, the law provides that the chairperson of the commission is the returning officer of the presidential election." I will emphasize on that the chairperson of the commission is the returning officer of the presidential election. I will make submissions later on in my submissions, and I will hope to persuade you that there is no such position as the returning officer of the presidential election. It is a creation of the chairperson of the IEBC, and it is created for the purposes of executing a very calculated scheme. Be that as it may, I wish you to then go on to the second paragraph from the end at line 34, where he says, "As per Article 86C of the Constitution of Kenya, The results from the polling stations are openly and accurately collated and promptly announced by the returning officer. The next sentence is important. It is also important to note that Regulation 87 of the Election General Regulations provides, and he then goes on to state, that he, as the chairperson, is the one who is then empowered to tally or to verify and tally the results. Again, later on on page 495, he goes on to state, this constitutional mandate, and he's talking about the mandate to tally and verify, this constitutional mandate falls squarely on the chairman of the commission, who is the national returning officer. Again, he repeats that, as gazetted in Gazette Notice number 4956 of the 28th of April 2022. The role of the national returning officer for the presidential election is not a shared responsibility and not subject to plenary discussion of the commission. Very important, because at the end of the day, this is how the second respondent then tallied, verified, and declared the results, but we will get to that later on. He states in the paragraph beginning as the gazetted national returning officer that in the spirit of teamwork, the chairperson involved the commissioners. That is all he did. In the spirit of teamwork, he felt that there was no duty to involve them. All he did was involve the commissioners. And again, later on during my submissions, I will get to that. My learned senior colleagues who submitted before me dwelt in detail on the content of Regulation 83. The content of Regulation 83.2 and Regulation 87.3.1, Regulation 87.3 in its entirety, and the manner in which those two regulations enable the chairperson singularly to tally or to verify and tally results in the presidential election. I do not wish to take any time to go through those two regulations, merely to state that it is my humble and respectful position that those two regulations are inconsistent with the provisions of Article 138(3)(c) of the Constitution, because they enable the result in the presidential election to be verified and tallied in a manner other than envisaged by the Constitution. There is a substantive prayer in the petition to declare those two regulations unconstitutional. And I state for that reason that relief should be granted. Later on in my submissions, I will then make submissions as to the consequence of those regulations being unconstitutional and having then hopefully being declared unconstitutional by this court. The fact that the tallying and verification of the result in the presidential election was done solely by the chairman is laid bare in the provisions of Gazette Notice number 9540 of 8th of August 2022. This again was referred to by my learned senior colleague Mr. Firoz Noroji whilst he's on his feet. And this Gazette Notice is to be found at page 36 of the affidavit sworn by the second respondent and drawn by the firm of my good and learned friend Mr. Eric Gumbo and Associates at page 36 of that affidavit. Mr. Noroji took the court through that affidavit extensively, through that Gazette Notice extensively. I only want to emphasize that before the election, the chairman of the commission is clear that it is he who will tally, who will verify and tally the results. And for some reason, the chairman the chairman of the IEBC had the propensity to publish Gazette Notices even where he didn't need to. because there was no need, there is no statutory basis or regulatory basis or even constitutional basis for gazetting the result pathway. But he went ahead and did it. And it is clear, and I submit it is admitted by the chairman of the IEBC that he exclusively, to the exclusion of the rest of the commissioners of the IEBC, tallied and verified the result for the presidential election. So as to determine conclusively that the tallying and verification was done exclusively by the chairman, it is again important to ask the question, where were the other commissioners? Where was the rest of the IEBC as the chairman was tallying and verifying the results? Again, I wish to refer you to the same affidavit that I have, the affidavit sworn by the chairman and drawn by the firm of G&A Advocates on the 26th of August this year. And it starts from the second paragraph. He states in the second paragraph that in my capacity as the chairperson of the commission, I was the returning officer of the presidential election. He then goes on later on in the affidavit at paragraph 45 to state that for the proper management of roles at the tallying center of the presidential elections, I had designated in writing specific roles to each of the commissioners and other commission staff. Annexed here to as WWC 9 is a bundle containing the said communication. Again, this bundle and this communication is important, members of the court, because it states clearly what the other commissioners or the roles that the chairman had designated the other commissioners to do. At page 41, there is an internal memo or a letter signed by the chairman on the 22nd of July addressed to the vice chairperson Juliana Cherere and Commissioner Molu Boya Molu. And it is headed Appointment to the Media and Call Center Management Team for the Presidential Tallying Center, Bomas of Kenya. And he goes on, he says, consequently, you are hereby appointed to the Media and Incident Reporting Team of the Presidential Election Tallying Center as follows. Juliana Cherere, Team Leader. Commissioner Boya Molu, Alternate Team Leader. And their roles are set out there. Terms of reference of your appointment provide liaison between the Presidential Returning Officer, who is himself, and the National Communication Center, preparing periodic briefs for the Presidential Returning Officer to address the media, briefing the Presidential Returning Officer on electoral activities across the country. Nothing to do with tallying and verification. The two subjects of that letter are commissioners of the IEBC. The next letter is on page 42, also dated the 22nd of July. This one is addressed to Commissioner Francis Wanderi and Commissioner Irene Masit. Again, under the hand of the chairman, and it is appointment to the Logistics, Welfare and Security Team at the Presidential Tally Center, Bomas of Kenya. Again, he appoints them in the second paragraph. Consequently, you are hereby appointed to oversight, provide policy direction and strategy formulation for the Welfare and Security Team of the Presidential Election Tallying Center. He then states their names and he states their terms of reference as security of the Tally Center and installations, the Tallying Center's logistics, planning and organization, security of members of the commission, staff, VIPs and other visitors, transport for commission staff, any other duties assigned. Important, those are two commissioners. None of them has been assigned to tally and verify. The third letter is on page 43, and this one is addressed to Commissioner Justus Nyang'aya. Again, Justus Nyang'aya is appointed to be in charge of dignitaries and protocol. And in the second paragraph, he is told that as team leader for dignitaries and protocol, he will be responsible for providing support services to the commission, managing protocol of dignitaries and VIPs, managing access to the Presidential Tally Center for accreditation, for accredited media, observers and agents, and any other responsibility. Now, those are out of 6 commissioners. Those are 5 commissioners. None of them is assigned to tallying and verification. There is a last letter, also dated the 22nd of July on page 44. This one is addressed to Commissioner Professor Abdi Guliye and Mr. Marjan Hussein Marjan. I wish to point out to this court and ask the court to note that Marjan Hussein Marjan is not a commissioner, but he is merely the CEO of the IEBC. Now, these two are appointed to the results management team at the Presidential Tally Center. Their duties are undertaking quality assurance of result forms received from the Presidential Returning Office desk, tallying and processing of election results. I urge that that is the language of Article 183.3, and assisting the Presidential Returning Officer in managing a record of the election results. Tallying and verification, I submit, on the admission of the chairman of the IEBC was done by Professor Abdi, Guliye, and Marjan Hussein Marjan, and not by the IEBC. The tallying process continues unconstitutionally as it was being conducted, and I want to pose the question and attempt an answer to the question: how does that process then end? That process ends as set out in paragraphs, again the same affidavit of the chairman, at paragraph 76 onwards. But the story that he tells, or the deposition that he makes, starts in paragraph 66. And I will read it because it is important. He deposed: shortly after 2 p.m., the commissioners and I had a meeting to be briefed on the final results by the commission secretary / CEO, an alternate leader of the Tally Center. The meeting was only for a briefing. He then goes on to say, the briefing was to be done before my declaration in accordance with Article 138(10) of the Constitution. So according to the chairman, all that was going to take place between him and the commissioners was a briefing, and he then goes on and declares the results. What did he do? After he narrates the story of the visit between paragraph 67 and 75, he then goes on under the substantive heading, Commission Briefing of Final Results. After the NSAC team had left, the Commission Secretary and Chief Executive Officer, who was also the alternate leader of the team of the Tallying Center, Mr. Marjan Hussein Marjan, walked into the boardroom. The purpose of the meeting was to receive the final tally of results of the presidential election before I could proceed to declare. From the chairman's own evidence, he assembles a team that comprises Professor Guliye and Mr. Marjan. They tally and verify the result, and Mr. Marjan is merely coming to brief the commission. What happens after that? There is between paragraph 77, where he states that copies of the results were handed to the commissioners, and that is all that was done. The result had been tallied and verified elsewhere. The copies are merely handed. There is a conversation. There is no agreement. And of importance, at paragraph 81, the chairman deposed as follows: I walked out of the meeting room accompanied by Commissioner Professor Guliye, Commissioner Molu, and the Chief Executive Officer. And he then went to the auditorium and declared the results.